You know what? I'm not even going to try to apologize because this is my channel, and in my channel I can talk about whatever the hell I want. And today I want to talk about the hell that is Misery by Stephen King. I know it's really dark, but it's raining outside and I usually use natural light for my videos, so yeah. Also, I'm sitting in front of the heater because why not? So, another Stephen King story. No one saw that coming. I bet you all know Misery. Even if you haven't read the book, I'm sure you've watched the movie. Misery is a psychological horror novel by the king of horror, and the protagonist happens to be an author. Author Paul Sheldon has a car accident, and his #1 fan, Annie, who is a nurse, finds him. Let's just say she finds him. And since she's a nurse, she knows exactly how to help him, so everything turns out fine. The end. Well, if you're a writer, here's a valuable lesson to learn from Misery. Keep a backup of your work. Well, I bet you thought I was going to talk about obsessive Annie and how she wants to keep him as a pet forever. Wrong. I'm here to talk about Paul. I'm here to judge Paul, who keeps one single copy of their manuscript. Like, seriously. Take notes, everybody. Back up your manuscript and then back up the backup, because you never really know when you're gonna get into a car accident and then kidnapped by a deranged fan. In the book, Annie tries to take care of Paul's injuries. Of course, she's not a psycho, but in the meantime, she also gets to read his new book, and she has some very strong opinions about it. This new book is not yet published, and she actually hated it, so I think she burns it. And I'm sure, I actually bet on it, that Paul can't remember all the details to rewrite the story from memory. Keep backups. That's my 2 cents. End of video. This is a terrible angle. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? The lighting is terrible, my face is terrible, the background is terrible. This is gonna be great. Annie happens to be a psycho indeed. And she's also very, very unpredictable. She's willing to harm him in order to keep him there with her. What does she want to do with him? We don't know. I think we cannot know. And I think she doesn't even know. And it's amazing how it's amazing how the entire story is built on 2 characters alone. The heated relationship that they develop in time, and the way Stephen King describes the scenes is absolutely fabulous. I think there's only 1 or 2 characters maybe appearing towards the end, but they're not essential to the story. So Paul tries to play along to save his life. Obviously, he's not suicidal. He tries to write the book that she's asked of him and tries to please her with the development of the plot. And here comes the second thing I love about this book. Stephen King actually wrote 2 stories in one, because next to Paul's story, tragic, accident and kidnapping and whatever, we also get to see Misery's story, the protagonist of the book Paul is writing. And then when the typewriter started breaking down and individual letters started falling apart, King actually gave us pages of the story with missing letters in it, and some were even, handwritten letters to fill in the spaces. How amazing is that? I think I need to show this to you. So here we have like an actual page, supposedly typewritten, and you can see that there are missing N's all over it. And I don't mind the idea. You see what I'm talking about? Isn't this incredible? I think N was the first letter that fell out. And then there were other letters too, so if I ever find them. Here you can see that both N and T are missing if the camera ever decides to focus. I think it's possible to see that now. And then as he was typing, more letters fell out. So yeah, that's amazing, unbelievable. Stephen King actually tried, he didn't try, he delivered. He actually made an effort to create this very realistic world in his story, that he actually created Paul's story using a broken typewriter, and he actually showed that to us. We actually got to see the letters falling out, and this is, not only impressive, but it's also kind of a breather. I suppose pausing the narration every now and then about what's happening to Paul and introducing Misery's tragic life was a breather. Gave me some space to breathe before I went back to Paul's tragic life. But these interventions are not irrelevant to the story, because based on whatever Paul wrote, that would determine Annie's mood for the day. And Stephen King, obviously being a master of the show don't tell rule, he delivered this so well. He showed us exactly what was happening and gave us a glimpse, just a glimpse of what might be going on inside Annie's head. Just a glimpse though, enough to fear for Paul's life, but not enough to understand. Which leads me to my next point. I think that understanding a villain is one way to rationalize their actions. So in this case, not being able to understand the way Annie thinks or her, why she does what she does, actually makes her very terrifying. She's perhaps one of the most terrifying villains in the history of novels. Coming upon Annie in real life, or someone like Annie, is something that can actually happen to anyone. It doesn't only happen in Stephen King's books. She's terrifying. My last 2 points have nothing to do with the plot of the book. I believe they still deserve a shout out though, so bear with me guys. The first is Stephen King's backstory while writing Misery, and the other is how the book made me feel as a writer myself. I'm a writer and I read a book about a writer written by another writer, so it made me feel things. In his book on writing horror, Stephen King spoke about his addiction to alcohol and drugs. And in this book, he admitted that there is a possible connection between him and author Paul Sheldon in the story. Paul was a writer who couldn't escape Annie, and Stephen King, on the other hand, was a writer who couldn't escape his addiction. He had found his own Annie. It seems like a silent cry for help, although it wasn't very obvious to him at the time. I find it very interesting how we actually got a tragic story about a tragic character written by a tragic character himself. And perhaps, maybe after all, it wasn't even a cry for help. Perhaps it was Stephen King's own way to make sense of his life. Sometimes I find myself trying to understand my own thoughts and feelings through my writing, and I'm not dealing with addiction, but more often than not, I find myself very overwhelmed by the thoughts that I have inside my head that I can't escape. And writing character-driven stories has helped me explore these thoughts sometimes. So this takes me to my final point. My own personal collection, my own personal connection to the story. There were many times where I found myself connecting to Paul through the writing process. You know that feeling when you're a writer and you feel like nobody's going to understand the way your mind works when you try to write something? When I read Misery, I felt like I was reading about myself. I was Paul! For the first time, I really felt like someone understood the way that I think and the way that my thoughts process works while writing a story. Stephen King understands me. So weird. As I was reading it, I felt like I was looking at my own reflection in the mirror. It was so weird, but not at all uncanny. It's more therapeutic in a way, like finding a friend to talk to. I know this doesn't make sense, but I really feel like Misery kind of gave me peace. I'm so weird. But Misery also gives me hope today after all these years that I've read it. You know, in the end, after the trauma and all, Paul Sheldon isn't sure if he's ever going to write again. And then he does. Everything just clicks and he's back at it. Because once a writer, always a writer, you know? And this gives me hope. Because not being able to write for months, it gets me wondering sometimes, you know, if I'm ever going to write again. And then I remember Paul, and I know I will write again when the time is right. And if Paul can do it after being kidnapped and tortured, I suppose I can. I just need time. But what if I don't write again? I'll be that writer who wrote one novel and then disappeared. Although a tragic ending where Paul loses his charisma and could never write again because every time he sits down before his typewriter he gets PTSD or something, that would have made a hell of an ending. But I'm really glad that wasn't the case, because now we all have a ray of hope because of Paul. No matter what happens, we can recover and we can get back on our feet or on our wheelchair in the case of Paul. Not funny, not funny. Perhaps not as fast as Paul did, perhaps not as fast as Paul recovered, but eventually we will. Thank you, Stephen King, for giving us Misery. It was a lovely book, and I'm sure that I'm the only person on earth who would ever call Misery a lovely book. I really loved it. I think Misery is like my second favorite book of all times. Although I'm not sure which the first one is. Is it The Shining? The Shining is number one. Misery is number 2, and I think His Bloody Project would be number 3, and then I'd go with maybe Lord of the Flies. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just making this up now. I don't have a list. I just have felt a very strong connection to Misery. And yeah, it's right up there. Like my second favorite book. I don't know. Maybe I'll change my mind tomorrow. That's it for today. Sorry for this like terrible, but I know you're not here for the looks of it. You're here because I make wonderful analysis and book reviews. I'm a disgrace. Bye now.